Cents Per Mile, featuring Charles Gracie, Paul Gibson, and Josh Haynes. Everyone knows the trucking industry has issues, but most people are afraid to talk about it.
Someone's got to do it.
With loads of recruiting and marketing experience and backed by the largest driver audience in the world, we deliver carriers the driver perspective, find solutions, and help make sense make sense.
Welcome to Cents Per Mile. I'm your host, Charles Gracie.
And I'm your co-host, Paul Gibson.
Hey, I'm Josh Haynes, and I can talk better than Charles. Charles, what are we talking about?
That's not saying much.
Yeah, I know. What are we talking about?
I got to do it all day. We're talking about stability in a volatile market.
Yeah, that market is crazy. I mean, that's pretty much all we've talked about, I feel like, for the past few episodes. It's just because everything's just up and down, and regulations are up and down, the market's up and down. And what do you even do to, like, we try to help, but, like, how do you navigate this stuff?
Well, and that's what we're going to talk about. We got some great guests coming on to help shed some light from their perspectives on what that looks like.
All right, but before we do that, we got to do the same stuff that we always say at the beginning of the episode. Wherever you listen to podcasts, Apple Music, Spotify, iHeartRadio, you can find us anywhere, or on YouTube, and wherever you watch or listen to the podcast. If you could like, subscribe, rate, it helps give us some momentum, puts us out there a little bit further, and the more people that hear it, the cooler stuff we get to do.
It's true. And you can also go to centspermilepodcast.com, where you can suggest a topic to be a guest or even to become a sponsor.
Sponsor? Speaking of sponsors, who's our sponsor today, Charles?
Mesilla Valley Transportation, starting from loading and unloading, maintaining the highest standards in terms of safety while in transit. They leave nothing to chance. Check them out at m-v-t.com.
All right. Well, it's not as fun as it used to be, but now I think it's time for the news. All right, so it's time for 10-2 News, where we go back and look at some of the coolest, weirdest, most prominent, influential, or just interesting stories from the past couple weeks. And this week we pulled everything from CDLLife. And good news, no politics. Kind of, sort of. But yeah. All right, sweet. Anyway, so we'll dive into it. All right, so apparently Josh speaks better than me as well. All right, so Minnesota cops deploy AI tech that can look inside vehicles to nab distracted drivers. Basically, what happens is there's this arm thing. We'll get the picture of it. It should be up on the screen here, which I think that's just a camera that's tall enough to look down into vehicles. But whatever. Everybody calls everything AI these days, right? Sweet. But what it does is apparently it can detect if somebody is driving distracted. You know, whether they're on their phone or even if they're not wearing a seatbelt or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it sends a picture as well to a cop who's waiting nearby who can look at that and decide based on the information if they want to pull the person over. Right. And that's the gist of it. But here's my favorite part. All right, we're going to scroll down. I'm going to get you the exact number. So they've got it set up in 3 areas. And they talk about the number of traffic stops versus the number of citations. So total, it comes out to 86 stops that were made based on this technology. There were 34 citations. So that's, yep, that is, yeah, that's not really a great rate for that. I don't feel like.
I'm just imagining, with technology advancing the way it is, they need to come up with something that could be like a mute button for my kid, because that's the only distraction I get when I'm driving down the road. He's sitting there trying to ask me a million questions. Look at this. Or you're driving at night and he turns on that phone and I don't know about your kids, but mine has the brightness turned all the way up. So it's like in flashbanged in your car.
Well, I actually am guilty of having the brightness all the way up, and I don't use the nighttime mode because I think it's weird when your screen looks kind of orange. But with this, though, with drivers, I think the implication with drivers going down the road, like, that's one more thing you have. Like, so you have,
It's a good thing, though.
you have your way stations. Now you have things actually watching you while you're going down the highway, on top of people on the side of the highway watching you while you're watching everybody else who's not watching what they're doing, and no one's really watching them. It's just like,
I'm going to play devil's advocate on it, though. It's good. When you got 80,000 pounds moving at 50 plus miles an hour down the road, the same roads that your family's on, my family's on, you want them to be attentive. You don't want them to be distracted. And I can't tell you how many times I've driven down the road and I see a driver and they don't even hide it. They got their phone up to their face like this driving, and it's terrifying.
well, but I mean, you could also argue that there's like cameras in trucks now.
Not all trucks. And who's monitoring those cameras? Generally, most often, it's in the sales pitch. They're only monitored on a critical event. What if we can avoid the critical event? I would like to do that. I don't want to get ran over by an 80,000-pound vehicle at 50 plus miles an hour.
Right, but also at the same time, it knows when the critical event is. That's how it knows how to start recording 15 seconds before. Different episode. We've talked about it. But my thing is, like, so with 86 stops, but only 34 citations, like less than half of them actually turn into citations. So what it doesn't really go into it. I want to know what they're seeing that makes them pull people over. Because at the same time, if you've got like about a 50% success rate of giving a citation, it sounds bad saying a success rate, but it's kind of what it feels like. It feels, but at that point, if the success rate is half, when it comes to drivers, they're going to get pulled over and they're going to have to stop moving. And half the time, it's not even working.
I think we need to get Trooper Joe on here to enlighten us with how that works.
Yeah, I mean, that might be somebody to talk to you. So the next one, this one is interesting. So I started, I didn't go with the title of the article in the notes that we have, because I want to explain the story as it goes. So basically, there was this truck driver, and he got in an incident with an SUV. Okay. Everybody was fine, but the driver got out. And he seemed disoriented, so the cop started asking him about drugs. And the driver said he wasn't on any drugs. Driver asked him about alcohol. Driver said he wasn't on any alcohol. But he seemed super disoriented, apparently. And then the officer asked him about drugs again. And then again, for about 45 minutes. Even gave him a breathalyzer. I think he blew like 0.01 or something like that, so like 1/8 of the legal limit, and they still arrested him and took him to jail and put him in a holding cell, and he was in there for 27 hours. Well, at no point did they offer him any sort of medical exam or make sure that he was okay, especially after like running into an SUV. Turns out this man had a stroke. And by being in there for 27 hours, he had already gotten like well past, all the damage was done and it couldn't be reversed. Because he didn't get the help that he needed. This man is now on 24-hour assistance for the rest of his life. And he is suing the police department for $10 million.
That's a tough one, because when you think of the job of the police nowadays and how much they come across on a daily basis, it's really a judgment call, case by case. No pun intended on that one. But when you're encountering those things, the likelihood of this exact scenario playing out duplicate times is less likely than the scenario where they are under the influence. But they're trained to look for those telltale signs, and I just can't believe that there was no evident markers that show like this guy is in some sort of distress.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it actually took his sister calling and pleading with the police station to let him get examined while he was like stuck there and being held. It took 27 hours of pleading with them to get them to let him go to a hospital.
Well, and again, putting yourself in the driver's shoes, it's a tough job out there. We know drivers are facing health issues every day, from eating to overall health and wellness. This is a tough one. I mean, I feel bad for the driver. I imagine the officer is going to learn from this one, because there's a $10 million learning curve on this one. So yeah, it's one of the less than ideal stories. I was hoping you'd bring me something to end this news segment that made me feel good.
Well, I mean, I feel like it doesn't affect everybody, so it seems more positive than all the news we've been covering. There's
I thought
that.
you were going to bring up the $5,000 Doge check or something, like something.
All right. Anyway, it's time to go behind the desk.
Do you want to grow your fleet but get buried by paperwork, slow hiring processes, and outdated systems, all while struggling to comply with changing safety regulations? Enter Tenstreet, the all-in-one platform that simplifies driver lifecycle management by bringing marketing, recruiting, onboarding, safety, and retention together in one place. Tenstreet coordinates and streamlines all your operations. Post to dozens of job boards at once. Speed time to hire with pre-population and AI to get more full applications faster. And manage the entire post-hire process, from cutting costs with online onboarding to integrating all safety data into one dashboard, to improving retention through thoughtful engagement. Whether you have one truck or 1,000, our expert team is here to help. Sleep soundly knowing you can pass an audit, attract needed drivers, and achieve your business goals. Join the thousands of carriers using Tenstreet. Sign up for a demo today.
Mesilla Valley Transportation, founded by truck drivers for truck drivers. Why choose MVT? Well, it's simple.
I started off as a driver. Now I'm managing routes. With MBT, the sky's the limit.
Balance is key. State-of-the-art equipment, a strong focus on safety, and a family-driven company culture where respect and hard work are at the core. Mesilla Valley Transportation, where we care about you. Join our family today.
Well, now it's time for Let's Make Sense Make Sense. And I couldn't think of a better two gentlemen to bring on than the CEO of CDLLife, Kevin Hall, and the COO of CDLLife, Nick Schappler. Welcome again.
Yeah, always great to be on Cents Per Mile.
Thanks, guys.
Best show in trucking, right?
Lack of better listening options. No, we try to cover these topics, and a lot of people are talking about how volatile the market is right now. I mean, from the marketing perspective to the recruiting perspective, there's a lot of different things, and then you bring in the rates and the cost of operating, and getting crushed by margins on every different angle. So we thought we'd try to bring them a little reprieve from that and offer some expertise, hence you guys, not me, to enlighten them on what you guys see out there and what's the best practices.
Yeah, it's tough. It's a tough market out there. I mean, I've been through the .com bubble bust, the 2008 recession, and now into this freight thing that's going on, right? And now's the time where you have to get lean. You have to focus on how do you get the most out of your investments? How do you keep your people happy? How do you keep the culture moving forward? How do you do all of those things that, again, doesn't bring your company down to its knees, and that you have this sunshiny, rosy period after all of this stuff starts coming back around?
Well, and I imagine that's tough. I know from leading a team that when you have a market like this, it's one of those things where trying to keep everyone motivated, everyone happy. It feels like on days you can win or at least get a small win, and on other days you're just hoping to make it through the day. When things get this unpredictable, what's the first thing you check to make sure your company's on solid ground? Like, how do you check to know that you guys are on a solid footing?
Yeah, I could start with this one. For me, it's the driver experience. So every carrier will look at this different way. There's many ways to evaluate this. You could be doing surveys of drivers. It could be anecdotal conversations with your drivers. It might be your time to hire. It could be your retention rates, right? Lots of ways to evaluate it. But ultimately, in an unpredictable landscape, your drivers, being your most important workforce, are the core of everything you do. So knowing you have stability there so you can operate with your customers successfully and reliably, super important, right? And then being able to have a core of drivers that you can count on, and you know that there's stability in that fleet is it's everything to a carrier. So I look at that, and like I said, every carrier will evaluate it differently.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when it's chaos, you got to focus on your people first, right? Drivers are the core of many of the carriers, as well as the recruiters are, and the other people in the office, and it's you have to focus on your people and make sure that they're okay and that they can see a light at the end of the tunnel to keep reassuring them.
So that leads me into my next question. I'll give this one to you, Kevin. How do you balance big picture goals with short-term market swings?
I think it depends on where you are, right? I've been in startups where, hey, you're just kind of struggling to keep everything going and keep the lights on. We're in a fortunate position here where we have a really good partner, really good board, really good investors. And I think that the big piece is relying on experience, people who've been through this. Again, we're blessed with people who have been through many of these freight recessions and freight cycles. And they say, don't worry about it. We're there. We're going to build for the future. We're going to invest in things. We're going to just keep doing what you're doing. Keep focused on the future and growth. And so, we use, as you all know, we use OKRs, objectives and key results, right? Because you have to focus on the big rocks and not the sand. And whenever there's those ripple effects that are going on, it's easy to get distracted into that sand and just get in that muck and try to figure out what you're going to do to recover in those. Just keep the eye on the big picture. Again, not everybody has that luxury of having those resources. We're definitely blessed to be that here.
So the next one I want to ask, and it's one that we hear people talk about whenever we've talked about this market, the turmoil and the pressures, is are there any specific trends or signals that you keep an eye out for to look ahead of the chaos or to see the car wreck before it's going to happen?
Lots of great resources out there. I mean, Kevin and I, we are not economists, but a couple resources I love, Coyote Logistics, now RXO, they have the Curve. They put out a quarterly report there. I think there's outstanding information there, to give you insights on spot market activity against contract rates. It'll loop in things like consumer spending, industrial production. It'll try to make sense of all the factors that are influencing the freight market, right? And nobody has a crystal ball. Nobody knows exactly where it's heading. But getting an understanding of where things are trending helps you in your organization make the best decisions, or at the very least, leads you to ask questions and how you can impact your organization to prepare for the future.
Yeah, prognostication, isn't that great? I mean, for me, it's really tapping into the folks who are there in the front line. I mean, you're talking to the execs at carriers, talking to recruiters, talking to people who are out there on the field, and obviously the market intelligence that we gather. But how many prognostications have we had over the last year and a half, right? I thought this was over. Wasn't this
every quarter is the finish line, right, Kevin?
It just shifts, right? The prognostications next quarter. Yeah.
Well, cents per mile has its Gandalf of freight, and when Thomas Wasson comes on, we're still looking for a Nostradamus of freight. Nice. But we do get a lot of different perspectives that come on the show, much like yourselves. One of the things that I've noticed when I'm out there is I'm looking at a lot of the recruiting stats, and I'm looking at the recruiting departments and their overall health. So like right now, for example, what we're seeing is February has been one of those months that across the board, every carrier we talk to, it's been a tough month to convert, where historically that's not the case. You see it start inching up and leading up into the spring fling is in recruiting, where everyone's starting new year, new me mentality, but that's not necessarily caught on yet in February. So I was really interested when I saw this question, because it was one of those that, depending on where you sit, that looks relatively different based on where you sit, what you're doing. If you're in ops, you're looking at different things than someone that's sitting in recruiting and looking at the driver movements.
Absolutely. I mean, the thing that's often forgotten in these chaotic times or tumultuous times is to remember what's going on right now, because that's how you're going to improve for the next time. We go in and out of these cycles and nobody really focuses on what does it feel like when it's chaos. Mm-hmm. And that's where you get down to your processes and having data and having, KPIs and things in front of you that actually make sense, that not technology that makes your life harder or makes you have to guess more about how to interpret the data, but having things that make sense and give you guidance. That's what you fall back on. That way, when the next cycle comes back around, right, you have all of those things you learned, you remembered all the problems that we had in those cycles, so that it's easier next time around, right? But we forget that. We just try to make it through, and we're like, whoo, we made it through that one. And then the next one comes and we're in the same boat.
Yeah, it's super important to balance like first principles that you're acting for. Like, what do you need out of your organization? What are you focused on? Like Kevin said with our OKRs, what are the big rocks? But then I think the other side of that you have to factor in is remaining adaptable. So when there are opportunities in the market, short-term opportunities that pop up, you can seize those. And you know what's going to help you because you know your first principles, you know what your organization needs. And that could be anything from a better offer to drivers. That could be anything from the speed to the time to hire. That, every organization is different, but understanding where you're investing to make your improvements is the starting point to making the right decisions there in a tough market.
Tons of great stuff you guys are throwing out there. Next question. How do you keep your team motivated and focused when everything feels so uncertain?
Let them do podcast shows like that. I don't know. No, I'm kidding.
Everyone gets a podcast.
That's right. I don't know what. I'm still trying to figure out motivations around all those. No, look, the people are the core. Like any company, it's all about the people and how motivated they are and the culture that you have. And so, in a downtime, it's hard. You can't do big events. You may not have the dollars to send everybody on a trip right to Hawaii or whatever that is. So you just keep engaged. You keep communications open. You keep, we have a monthly Cub Connection, as you all know, just to bring everybody together to see what's doing. You continue to celebrate. You up the communications more than what maybe you typically would around those. You interact with more people. You try to collaborate more, and just get back to, hey, this is going to be okay, right? We're going to get through this. These things happen, and keeping the positive momentum around just the team, because you have to have them motivated and moving forward and feeling positive about there is a light at the end of the tunnel.
So Kevin, is that your way of saying we're not going to Key West this year?
Well, when you say we, I'm part of that, right? Like
at what point did we get to who, when, what? There was a time.
You were a part of that. I'm sorry.
There is a we.
That's where Paul was last week's episode, Charles. We
What?
went where he was. That's where he was.
I wondered what that budget line item was. My gosh.
Hey, man.
Cents per mile in Key West. I like it.
Mental health first. Mental
we do
health
too.
first.
Let's make it happen. Sponsors. All right. Getting back, switching lanes. Now, when the market takes such a sudden turn, do you switch things up fast or stick with the plan, Nick?
Yeah, that's what I was saying earlier. I think it's important to have your first principles laid out so you know what your organization is focused on. But you have to remain flexible because in trucking, we're in a cyclical market. Things do change on a dime. There are opportunities that you need to seize to be competitive, right? So I think you need to be adaptable. But if you're just, a squirrel chasing a nut at every single opportunity and you're always changing and you don't have what KPIs are guiding you and what your organization's focused on, then you end up looking up 1 or 2 quarters down the road and nothing actually was accomplished toward your goals, right?
I think that's solid because you got a lot of people out there, especially in the entrepreneur side. I met a couple of them when I was at the FreightWaves event, and they're like, hey, we got 8 different things going, but we don't know which one of the irons we want to move on. And that does get intimidating. Eventually it becomes daunting, and it's almost like paralysis takes place. Like you don't know which one's going to manifest into something because you've got so many things going on out there. So I'd imagine solid footing helps you place direction behind your efforts.
Yeah, and if you don't, it just leads to waste. And it's the waste in multiple forms. It's your time, it's your organization's money, right? In recruiting and retention, where we see it, if a goalpost is switching every week from cost per lead to cost per hire to volume to quality, and you're constantly changing and there's no first principle guiding you, at the end of the day, you're just churning through leads and whatever comes out, and you don't really know what worked, what didn't work, what you're experimenting with in A/B testing to improve, right? There's no barometer for success. So it's, really, really critical to outline your key goals, what your KPIs are to measure them and track that very diligently.
Joe, remember when the iPhone came out? It was doing everything, right? It did everything, but it was a really hard to use phone.
It still is.
I think recruiting is the same. I think there's a lot of chaos in recruiting because, there's a lot of load on recruiters and directors of recruiting that's out there. There's a lot of chaos going on, even in non-tumultuous times, right? And so there is a better way. There is a way to bring resolve to that. And don't forget, we're here to try to bring drivers in to fill seats at the end of the day.
Did Kevin just make a slight on green text, Charles? I think he did. Maybe you should get an iPhone. You'd recruit better.
No.
Who's our sponsor?
No.
I second that, Paul.
I actually had an iPhone once. Full transparency. I had it once. I used it once to turn call forwarding to my Android, and that was the only time I used it. I am an Android guy through and through.
Mm-hmm.
Android, if you want to sponsor us, I'm your guy. All right, moving on. So, Nick, one thing that you said that I found important in that was, all of it was great, but the one tidbit that I could relate to the most is that moving goalpost in the recruiting eyes, because you see it a lot where someone's like, hey, I want you to chase cost per lead. And then you achieve cost per lead. but that's not necessarily going to translate into a conversion. That's, you're building a platform, you're building a baseline to remarket to and convert. But then there's cost per hire, and then sometimes people are putting other metrics in there. Do you see that hinder a lot of people's efforts when they're constantly switching which metric that they're gauging?
I do. And back, pre-COVID days, it definitely was more of a volume-based industry. Cost per lead was the focus. Getting volume in to the funnels was really what mattered. And I really have seen that shift over the last 2 to 3 years to being a focus on further down the funnel metrics, like your cost per approved candidate, qualified driver, orientation, or hired. And I do think that those are way better metrics. The challenge you get into as people are starting to adapt these things, they're building out their dashboards to measure this, and they have all the metrics right in front of them, right? And the tendency can then be, okay, look at every chart. And so I say green light or red light, good or bad. And then you start saying, well, cost per hire is good. It's looking great, but my cost per lead has gone way up. That's a problem. And then you forget that you've invested in higher quality leads that have taken more time to get through the funnel and with pre-screening and everything in place to get you those hires at a good cost. And if you switch the field goal post there and say, let's try to bring down cost per lead, you wake up 2 to 3 weeks later and cost per hire has crept up on you. So again, operating from first principles is key. And I think going back to the driver experience, like you just need to understand the driver, right? And for us, we have generative journey technology. It's the right time to contact the driver, the right method, and the right message. We find that that's a really key part of the recruitment process.
Awesome. Now I'm going to hit you guys with one. Let's keep it short because it's really important. How much of a difference do you think company culture plays when things are getting rough?
Company culture is everything. You have to maintain that as the core focus, and everything else. My experience is everything else falls in place after that.
Yeah, it's critical, and it's really hard in trucking, right? Drivers, they want the community, they want the culture, they're on the road away from their families. It's difficult. But we've seen small fleets that have retention rates or churn rates in the 30%, where most of the industry is in the 90%. It can make a huge impact to your organization.
Makes the hiring easier, recruiting easier as well when you have a great culture.
Absolutely. I'll second that. Where can people find you guys? Kevin?
CDLLife.com is the largest news and information in trucking, and CDLConnect.io has all the latest technology and solutions to make your life easier in recruiting and make more impact regardless of the time.
All right. Well, I appreciate you guys taking some time out of your busy days to help bring a light to the end of the tunnel for everyone, and we'll see.
Now, wait 2 seconds before you let them go and we pay some bills. I'm going to need Kevin to go ahead and check off that third name on that list that's behind him.
Wait, who's our sponsor this time?
That has Josh, and I'll
who's
wait
our sponsor?
for that trip to Hawaii. That's what it is. There it is. All right.
Right. There it is. Our Key West trip is approved.
All right.
Who's our sponsor?
Mesilla Valley Transportation.
Oh, well, look at that. Robert Pearson is the favorite on the show.
It's fine. As long as you send me to Hawaii, I'll be fine.
Key West.
It's a long flight, Josh.
Maybe next year. It was great last week, but we got to go to an ad. CDLLife has the largest, most engaged driver audience in the world and is the #1 platform for driver-facing news, entertainment, and community. With millions of monthly page views on our news site, a social reach of over 71 million, and over 600,000 app downloads, it all adds up to 1 billion driver touchpoints a year. If your company is looking for drivers, you just found them. All right, well, the world's crazy. Running a company is hard. Working at a company is hard. Being alive is kind of hard lately. Maybe just, I don't know. Anyway, but it was good to hear from some people who had sound advice on how to go about handling that from like a top-down perspective in running a business.
And we're not just saying that because they sign our checks. These people have been there. They've been in the trenches. They do this every day. Hopefully you could take, little tidbits out of that and apply it to what you're trying to do and find success. But until next time, thanks for tuning in to Cents Per Mile. I'm your host, Charles Gracie.
And I'm your co-host, Paul Gibson. See you next time.